Half of Nova Scotia is a broken-off piece of Africa. A ship's anchor once flew 2 miles across the city of Halifax and is still sitting in a residential neighbourhood. And the Government of Canada holds a file on an object that came down off a fishing village in 1967, was searched for by Navy divers and was never identified. All 3 of those are verified. All 3 are in this video. We went through 50 documented facts about Nova Scotia, checked every figure, and put them in order, starting with the ones that are merely surprising and ending with the one that is hardest to accept. This channel does verify geography that refuses to sound true. Subscribe if that is your kind of thing. Starting with Fact 50. Fact 50. Nowhere is far from the sea. There is no place in Nova Scotia more than 67 kilometers from the ocean. The province runs 580 kilometers end to end, so somewhere in the middle there should be an interior. There isn't one. It is a peninsula, never more than about 130 kilometers wide, bitten so deeply by bays and estuaries that salt water reaches almost everywhere. Its only land border with the rest of North America is one narrow isthmus. Everything else is edge. Fact 49. An island you can drive onto. Cape Breton is an island you reach without crossing a bridge. Since 1955, it has been joined to the mainland by the Canso Causeway, 1.4 kilometers of rock fill tipped into the strait carrying road and rail. The island covers about 10,280 square kilometers and kept its name anyway. A navigation lock lets ships through, which preserves the technicality. Islands are supposed to be harder to reach than that. Fact 48. Nearly 4,000 islands. Canada's second smallest province has more than 3,800 coastal islands. Nova Scotia is 55,284 square kilometers. Smaller than Croatia, with an island count you would expect from an archipelago nation. Glaciers ground the coast into ridges and drowned valleys. Then the sea rose and turned every high point into land, surrounded by water. One of those islands is Oak Island. Another is Sable Island. Both come back later in this list. Fact 47. Second smallest, second most crowded. The image of Nova Scotia is empty coastline and fishing wharves, so the density figure lands strangely. It is Canada's second smallest province and also its second most densely populated at roughly 17.4 people per square kilometer. The reason is the denominator. Nova Scotia's population is modest but compressed into a sliver, while bigger provinces average theirs across vast empty north. The whole province is 0.6% of Canada's land area. Fact 46. The highest tides on Earth. In one Nova Scotia bay, the sea rises and falls the height of a 5-story building, twice a day, every day. Guinness World Records recognizes Burntcoat Head in the Bay of Fundy's Minas Basin as holding the greatest tidal range on Earth, a mean tide of 14.5 meters and an extreme range of 16.3. The bay's natural sloshing period runs close to 13 hours, almost exactly the Atlantic tidal cycle, so each incoming tide arrives in step with the water already moving. Resonance does the rest. Fact 45. A street plan from 1753 that never changed. Colonial towns get widened, redeveloped, demolished. Lunenburg was drawn up on a rectangular grid in Britain in 1753, and the grid is still there, 8 blocks by 6, running straight down a steep hill to a working waterfront. UNESCO designated it in 1995 as the best surviving example of a planned British colonial settlement in North America. It is one of only 2 urban World Heritage sites in Canada. The other is Quebec City. Tide of 21 meters. On the night of the 4th of October 1869, the water in the Bay of Fundy rose 21.6 meters, roughly half again as high as the already record-setting normal tide. 3 things stacked. A spring tide was at maximum, abnormally low pressure, let the sea surface bulge, and hurricane winds piled water into the funnel. It is called the Saxby Gale because a British naval officer had publicly predicted it a year in advance from lunar alignment. He was right. Fact 43. Boston does not buy its Christmas tree. The tree on Boston Common every December is not purchased. It is sent by the government of Nova Scotia as a thank you for the medical aid Boston dispatched after the 1917 Halifax Explosion. The first tree went south in 1918. The gift has been made annually since 1971. It is usually a white spruce, 40 to 50 feet, escorted 1,100 kilometers by police. In 2022, it came from a Cape Breton community called Christmas Island. Still going. Fact 42. The world's largest Titanic graveyard. More Titanic victims are buried in one Halifax cemetery than anywhere else on the planet. 121 lie in Fairview Lawn, with 19 more at Mount Olivet and 10 at Baron de Hirsch, 150 in a single city. Halifax was the nearest major port to the sinking, so it became the recovery center. The graves curve across a hillside, in rows shaped from above like a ship's hull. About a third carry no name, only a number and a date. Fact 41. Fossils delivered twice a day. Paleontology means permits, grids, and years. At Joggins, nobody excavates. The world's highest tides quarry 14.7 kilometers of sea cliff and put new 310-million-year-old fossils on the beach on a 12-hour schedule. The 689-hectare site holds the thickest and most complete record of Pennsylvanian rock anywhere on Earth. Fossilized trees stand upright in the cliff exactly where they grew, stacked at multiple levels. The tide is opening them one forest at a time. Fact 40. Arm of gold is a copying error. Broad door reads beautifully in French, arm of gold, for a golden lit inland sea. That is not where the name came from. Maps before 1872 label it Le Lac de Labrador. Labrador was the Portuguese name for much of eastern Canada, and centuries of hand copying across languages softened it into a French homonym. The meaning was applied afterwards. The Mi'kmaq name is older and more accurate. Pitupac, roughly the long, salt water. Fact 39. The boat on the dime. Never lost. Working fishing schooners are heavy and compromised. Racing yachts are purpose-built. Bluenose was both, and between 1921 and 1938, she won every International Fisherman's Trophy series she entered, undefeated across 17 years. She qualified because the trophy demanded genuine working boats that had finished a season on the Grand Banks. She is on the Canadian 10-cent coin, and her replica still ties up at the same Lunenburg wharf. Those were the surprising ones. From here, it gets harder. Fact 38. The north half came from Scotland. A province named New Scotland turns out to be partly built from the crust that became Scotland. The Avalon terrain, which forms northern Nova Scotia and Cape Breton, sat attached to the Scandinavian and Scottish landmass before the Atlantic opened. It is geologically separate from the rocks to the south, and the boundary between them is a real mappable fault. The colonial name was a gesture. The rock underneath was not consulted. Fact 37. Part of Nova Scotia is south of Toronto. Nova Scotia is the far eastern, fog-bound, cold water province. Toronto is southern Ontario. The map disagrees. Cape Sable Island, the southernmost point of the Nova Scotia Peninsula, sits at about 43 degrees 27 minutes north, below Toronto's 43 degrees 39. Canada's east coast angles hard southwest, and the province hangs down into the Atlantic like a hook. Halifax itself sits at roughly the latitude of Bordeaux. Fact 36. Felt on two other islands. The Halifax Explosion of 1917 was felt on Prince Edward Island, 180 kilometers away, and on Cape Breton, 207 kilometers away. 200 kilometers is a 4-hour drive. A blast that size couples energy into the bedrock as well as the air, and the ground-borne shock outruns the sound, which is why distant communities felt a jolt before they heard anything. A column of white smoke rose more than 3,600 meters above the harbor. Fact 35. The ship that ran out of embalming fluid. The cable ship Mackay-Bennett left Halifax to recover Titanic's dead, carrying roughly 100 coffins, 100 tons of ice, and 12 tons of iron bar. Over 13 days, it found 306 bodies. Nova Scotia law required embalming before burial ashore. The supply ran out, and so 116 were committed to the sea and 190 came home. The iron was 28-pound bars loaded before departure to weigh bodies down. Someone had done that arithmetic in advance. Fact 34. The unknown child got a name. A grave in Halifax, marked only unknown child, was assumed to be permanently anonymous. In 2007, after an earlier misidentification was corrected, forensic testing named him Sidney Leslie Goodwin, 19 months old, the youngest recovered victim of the disaster. His entire family died in the sinking, so nobody was left to claim him. The headstone had been paid for by the crew of the Mackay-Bennett, men who had spent 13 days pulling strangers out of the North Atlantic. Fact 33. Darwin sighted a Nova Scotia beach. Darwin's evidence is filed under finches and the beagle. It also includes a muddy cliff face on the Bay of Fundy. UNESCO records that the Joggins fossil cliffs played a vital role in the development of seminal geological and evolutionary principles through the work of Lyell and Darwin, and the site was cited in On the Origin of Species in 1859. Lyell had found a fossil amphibian inside a tree stump there in 1852. Geologists still call it the Coal Age Galapagos. Fact 32. 100,000 bones in 1 mile. A 1.6-kilometer stretch of shoreline at Wasson Bluff has produced more than 100,000 fossil bones, the largest find in North America from the Triassic-Jurassic boundary, announced by Paul Olsen and Neil Shubin in 1986 with National Geographic Society funding. The rock captures the exact mass extinction that cleared the field for the dinosaurs. The haul included 12 complete skulls of animals on the line that leads to mammals, all of it from one beach. Fact 31. 350 wrecks on one sandbar. Parks Canada records more than 350 shipwrecks off a single island, the earliest documented being the English ship Delight in 1583. Sable Island sits across the transatlantic lanes where the cold Labrador Current meets the Gulf Stream, a collision that manufactures fog, 20 shifting submerged bars, and a landform only 30 meters tall, and the hazard effectively disappears. The last wreck was a yacht in 1999. Pieces of it are still on South Beach. Fact 30. A bird that breeds nowhere else. Global superlatives normally belong to vast wildernesses. This one belongs to a sandbar you could walk across in 15 minutes. Sable Island holds the world's largest breeding colony of gray seals, and it is the only breeding ground on Earth for the Ipswich Sparrow. Isolation did it. No land predators, no development, one strange habitat. The seal colony is dense enough that up to 12 species of shark patrol the water around it. Fact 29. A lobster the weight of a toddler. A supermarket lobster is a pound or two. Guinness World Records lists the heaviest marine crustacean ever recorded at 20.14 kilograms, 44 pounds 6 ounces, and 1.06 meters from tail fan to claw tip, caught off Nova Scotia on the 11th of February 1977. Lobsters never stop growing and metabolize slowly in cold water, so size is really a measure of how long one avoided traps. It was sold to a New York restaurant owner. Nothing has beaten it nearly 50 years. Fact 28. One of the deepest coal mines on Earth. Springhill is a town of a few thousand people. It's numb. 2 colliery ran sloping shafts 4,300 meters long, reaching galleries more than 1,200 meters below the surface, one of the deepest coal mines in the world. Depth accumulated because the seams tilted steeply and the workings followed them down. That depth is also what made it lethal. On the 23rd of October 1958, the stored strain released and the floors slammed up into the ceilings. 74 men died. Fact 27. There is an ocean inside Cape Breton. The lake in the middle of Cape Breton Island is salt water, and it has tides. Brasdor Lake covers 1,099 square kilometers, connects to the open Atlantic through 3 passages, and reaches 287 meters deep, deeper than much of the sea around the island. It is a drowned river lake system, flooded when the ice melted and sea level rose. It carries about 1,000 kilometers of shoreline, all of it inside an island, inside a province. Fact 26. 20 square miles reclaimed by hand. By 1755, Acadian farmers had diked roughly 13,000 acres of salt marsh around the Bay of Fundy, over 20 square miles, using hand tools, with no engineering profession and no central authority. It worked because it was communal. Dike maintenance was organized collectively, village by village, and that tradition survives in the region's marsh bodies today. The embankments ran 2 to 7 meters wide at the base, built 45 centimeters above the highest recorded tide, that is halfway. Which of these has been hardest to accept so far, and were any of them already familiar to you? Put it in the comments and say so if you knew one already. Everything up to this point is the surprising half of the list. What is coming took considerably longer to confirm. Fact 25. A ferry older than the country. The Halifax Harbour ferry has run since February 1752, when John Connor's contract was renewed by the Nova Scotia government 115 years before Canada existed. It is the oldest saltwater ferry service in North America and the second oldest in the world, after the Mersey. It is not a heritage attraction. It is a stop on the municipal transit system. 12 minutes across, a fare and a transfer. Oars, then horses, then steam, then diesel. Fact 24. Arms older than Canada by 242 years. Provincial symbols feel like Confederation paperwork. Nova Scotia's coat of arms was granted in 1625 by Charles I for the first Scottish colony on the Canadian mainland, the oldest provincial achievement of arms in Canada, and the oldest British coat of arms still in use anywhere outside Great Britain. Canada was formed in 1867. The shield deliberately reverses Scotland's colors, blue on white, so the two could not be confused. It was restored by royal warrant in 1929. Fact 23. Nova Scotia began near the South Pole. The rocks that make up Nova Scotia formed close to the South Pole and have been moving north ever since. The Geological Survey of Canada dates the microcontinents Ganderia, Avalonia, and Meguma to roughly 500 million years ago in far southern latitudes. The evidence is magnetic. Iron minerals froze in alignment with Earth's field at formation, recording the latitude. At Blue Rocks near Lunenburg, the folded bands in the shoreline are sediment laid down in a vanished polar ocean. Fact 22. More water than every river on Earth. Each tidal cycle moves more water in and out of the Bay of Fundy than flows from all the freshwater rivers on the planet combined. The figure is roughly 160 billion tons per 12.5-hour cycle. The comparison holds because rivers deliver a steady trickle by planetary standards, while a tide shifts a slab of ocean twice a day, and Fundy's resonance amplifies that slab far beyond normal. At low tide, you can walk a kilometer out across red mud that will be gone by afternoon. Fact 21. The largest explosion before the bomb. The pre-nuclear record does not belong to a battlefield or a test range. It belongs to a harbor, by accident, on a Thursday morning. Guinness World Records rates the Halifax Explosion of the 6th of December 1917 at 2.9 kilotons of TNT, the largest man-made explosion before nuclear weapons, counting deaths, force, and radius of destruction. Court. The freighter, Mont Blanc, was carrying about 2,900 tons of explosives when a deck fire burned for 20 minutes while crowds gathered at windows to watch, about 1/5 of Hiroshima's yield. Fact 20. The harbor emptied, then came back. The blast displaced and vaporized enough water to momentarily expose the floor of Halifax Harbor. What returned was a tsunami. It swept the Dartmouth shore and destroyed the Mi'kmaq settlement at Turtle Grove, which had stood there for generations. The mechanism is the same as an underwater earthquake at point-blank range. The detonation punched a cavity into the water column and tore the harbor bottom open. Turtle Grove was gone in minutes. It was never rebuilt. Fact 19. Dinosaur footprints. The size of a penny. A dinosaur footprint is supposed to be a crater. In 1984, an amateur named Eldon George exposed 5 trackways on a sandstone slab 16 inches by 14 at Wasson Bluff. The 3-toed prints are penny-sized, made by a theropod about the size of a robin, probably a juvenile Coelophysis, and they remain the smallest dinosaur tracks ever found. He kept them in his own rock shop for 3 decades before donating them in 2015. Fact 18. A sandbar that should not exist. Sandbars are temporary. This one is 42 kilometers long, barely 1.3 kilometers wide. At its broadest, rises about 30 meters, and sits alone at the edge of the continental shelf, 290 kilometers southeast of Halifax. Sable Island survives because marram grass roots bind the dunes, and because sand is constantly resupplied from the bank beneath it. It has no trees. It also moves, reshaping itself year to year, which is why old charts of it are useless. Fact 17. 500 horses. Nobody may touch. More than 500 wild horses live on that treeless sandbar, and they have been there since the 1700 seconds. They are protected under the Canada National Parks Act. Visitors must stay at least 20 meters back, and may not feed, touch, or interact with them. Rainwater collects in dune ponds, and marram grass provides forage across roughly 250 generations with no human management at all. In 1959, Ottawa planned to remove the herd. A public campaign, much of it letters from schoolchildren, stopped it. Fact 16. Live breaking news was invented here. The origin of live television news should belong to a moon landing or an assassination. It belongs to a coal town. The 1958 Springhill disaster was the first major international event carried live on television by the CBC, and CNN describes it as the world's first live television broadcast news event. Cameras arrived while men were still trapped, and the outcome was unknown for days. 12 came out after 5.5 days from behind a 49-meter rockfall. 7 more after 9. Fact 15. The Empire's first flight left from a frozen lake. The British Empire spanned a quarter of the planet, and its first controlled powered flight left the ground from the ice of Badeck Bay in Cape Breton. On the 23rd of February, 1909, the Silver Dart, flown by J.A.G. Pretty, covered roughly 800 meters at about 65 kilometers an hour, 9 meters up. Alexander Graham Bell had founded the Aerial Experiment Association there. The aircraft was towed into position behind a horse-drawn sleigh, with men on skates holding the wingtips straight. Fact 14. Arctic and southern species in the same water. Species ranges are governed by temperature, so this reads as 2 climates occupying one place. In Broad Door Lake, shrimp-like animals and segmented worms in the deep cold water are found nowhere else outside the high Arctic, while oysters and other species in the warm shallows are uncommon anywhere north of Virginia. More than 30 degrees of latitude represented across less than 10 kilometers. The deep basins never fully mix. UNESCO designated the watershed a biosphere region in 2011. Fact 13. Farmland taken from the highest tides on Earth. 16 meters of water twice a day is a force modern engineering treats carefully. In the 1,680 seconds, Acadian settlers walled it out with earth and timber. The landscape of Grand-Pré, inscribed by UNESCO, covers over 1,300 hectares of reclaimed polder in a zone with an average tidal range of 11.6 meters. The device was the aboito, a one-way wooden valve that drains fresh water out and slams shut against the incoming sea. Those fields are still farmed. 340 years later. Fact 12. The last place outside Scotland where Gaelic lived. Immigrant languages usually fade within 3 generations. Scottish Gaelic did not in Cape Breton. Atlantic Canada is the only region in North America where it survived as a community language after the Gaelic communities of Ontario, Quebec, and North Carolina disappeared. Nova Scotia runs an Office of Gaelic Affairs, and Gaelic is a recognized minority language in the province. In September 2021, the first Gaelic medium primary school outside Scotland opened at Mabu. Some songs preserved there are no longer recorded in Scotland itself. Everything from here on is the part people refuse to believe first and check afterwards. Fact 11. Half the province is Africa. Continents feel permanent, so this one sounds wrong. It isn't. The southern half of mainland Nova Scotia sits on the Meguma terranean basement rock that began off the northwest coast of Africa. A granodiorite dated to about 576 million years matches, in age and isotopic and geochemical signature, igneous rocks of the Owars Azotic group in Morocco's Anti-Atlas. 22 offshore samples were dated grain by grain, using zircon crystals as uranium clocks. The ages line up with Morocco, not with Canada. Fact 10. The anchor 2 miles away. Half a ton of iron does not travel 2 miles through the air. The shank of the Mont Blanc's anchor, about 1,140 pounds, landed 3.2 kilometers south of the blast at Armdale on the far side of the northwest arm. The detonation reached roughly 5,000 degrees Celsius and pressures of thousands of atmospheres. The hull largely vaporized and what survived left as shrapnel. The anchor shank is still there, mounted on a pedestal at the corner of Anchor Street and Spinnaker Drive. Fact 9. A cannon that melted on the way. Accepting that the blast through heavy metal is one thing, the barrel melted in flight. Mont Blanc's forward 90mm gun landed about 5.6 kilometers north near Albro Lake in Dartmouth, with its barrel melted away. At the center of the detonation, temperatures reached around 5,000 degrees, well past the melting point of steel, so the gun was softened in the fireball before the pressure wave threw it clear across the harbor. It is on public display at 171 Albro Lake Street. You are looking at steel that ran. Fact 8. The oldest reptile was found inside a tree. 2 improbabilities stacked. Hylonomus laeli, the earliest reptile and amniote in the fossil record, was identified at the Joggins fossil cliffs inside fossilized lycopsid tree stumps. Coal-age trees rotted hollow while still standing upright. Small animals fell in, could not climb out, and sediment sealed the trunks. The stumps worked as pitfall traps and then as specimen jars. More than 100 individual tetrapods have come out of them. Every dinosaur, bird, lizard, and mammal alive descends from that line. Fact 7. The Horse Island is part of a city. Municipal boundaries are supposed to be contiguous, or at least visible from themselves. Sable Island, 290 kilometers out in the open Atlantic, no permanent residents, several hundred wild horses, is administratively part of the Halifax Regional Municipality. The 1996 amalgamation folded the old Halifax County into a single municipality, and the island had long been administered under that county, so the boundary followed the paperwork out to sea. The horses live in a city that also contains a container port and a naval dockyard. Fact 6. 98% of the coal field is underwater. Nova Scotia's largest coal field runs 300 kilometers offshore, almost to the south coast of Newfoundland, and 98% of it lies beneath the sea. Men mined it. The seams dip gently seaward under hundreds of feet of layered sandstone, and that sandstone was the roof. Roughly 100 mines worked the Sydney coalfield, producing more coal than every other Nova Scotia field combined. By the early 1900 seconds, the coal faces had reached about 2 miles out. Crews rode the rail cars out and back every shift under the Atlantic. Fact 5. The largest free black settlement outside Africa. The 1,780 seconds were the height of the Atlantic slave trade. In 1784, the largest community of free black people anywhere in the world outside Africa was a village on the Nova Scotia coast. Birchtown, founded near Shelburne in 1783, held upwards of 1,500 residents, and newspapers in New York and London acknowledged it as such at the time. Britain had promised freedom to enslaved people who left rebel masters, refused American demands to return them, and evacuated roughly 3,000 to 3,500 black loyalists north. Many carried freedom certificates signed by Brigadier General Samuel Birch. The town is named after him. Fact 4. Nova Scotians founded Freetown. Migration narratives run one way, this one reversed. In 1791, Thomas Peters, a black pioneer sergeant, traveled from Nova Scotia to London to protest the treatment of black settlers in person, met the chairman of the Sierra Leone Company, and negotiated free passage for about 1,200 black Nova Scotians to West Africa. They sailed and founded what is now Freetown, the capital of Sierra Leone. Birchtown's land was rocky, the promised supplies never fully arrived, and the Shelburne riots of 1784 had made the danger explicit. Their descendants there are still called the Nova Scotians. Fact 3. A city that moved people in dump trucks. The detail sounds like bitterness in hindsight. It is in the record, and the city does not dispute it. Africville stood on the Bedford Basin shore for more than 150 years. Between 1964 and 1970, residents were removed, homes demolished, the church bulldozed at night, and some belongings moved in municipal dump trucks. Halifax had approved water and sewers in 1948 and never installed them while sitting a prison, an infectious diseases hospital, and an open dump nearby, then used the resulting conditions as the justification. The formal apology came on the 24th of February 2010. Not every former resident accepted it. Fact 2. 230 years of digging, nothing found. Projects end. This one has not. Since 1795, when 16-year-old Daniel McGuinness found a depression under an oak tree, people have been excavating the same hole on a small island off Nova Scotia. 6 men have died doing it. Millions of dollars have gone into the ground. No treasure has ever been confirmed. What keeps it running is that the site is not empty. Oak platforms at regular intervals. Coconut fiber, confirmed by the Smithsonian on a beach, with no palms. Wood, carbon dated to the 1,600 seconds. A young Franklin Roosevelt joined a dig in 1909. Local legend holds that 7 men must die before the treasure is found. 6 have. Fact 1. The government's own UFO file. Governments explain these away. This one did not. On the night of the 4th of October 1967, multiple witnesses, including RCMP officers, watched an object descend into the water off Shag Harbour, float and sink. The Coast Guard and the Navy searched. Divers worked the site for days and found a patch of yellow foam recorded as roughly 80 feet across and extending about half a mile. Nothing was ever recovered. Because the Rescue Coordination Center confirmed no aircraft was missing or overdue, the object had no remaining category, and the paperwork recorded that, literally. Government of Canada documents refer to it as an unidentified flying object, and the files sit in Library and Archives Canada under Department of National Defence Records, RG24, Box 7523. That is not a claim about what it was. It is a claim about what the file says. The file says unidentified. Every fact in this video is documented and sourced, including the ones that still feel wrong after the figure lands. The one that took longest to accept is not the file at Shag Harbour. It is fact 6, that 98% of the Sydney coal field lies under the ocean, and that for generations, men rode rail cars 2 miles out beneath the Atlantic to go to work, finished the shift, came home, and did it again the next morning. Which of these do you still find hard to accept? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe for more verified geography that refuses to sound true,